and welcome to the Plenty of Positivity podcast. I am your host, Courtney Beck, and today we have a very special guest, Daniela Tudor. Daniela is the CEO and founder of WEconnect Health. She is a global speaker, strategic advisor to founders and C-suite executives, and an electronic music producer. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to welcome Daniela Tudor.
Thank you so much for having me on, Courtney. This is so exciting.
Absolutely, Daniela. I have to mention to the listeners, our first conversation. I mean, my goodness, I think that one could have gone for like hours and hours. I really enjoyed our conversation. I looked forward to this particular conversation where we could share, obviously, your story with our listeners. So why don't we get started right away? If you could please begin with an introduction and a background of yourself.
Absolutely. I'm Daniela Tudor, CEO and co-founder here at WeConnect Health. I'm also a person in long-term recovery from substance use disorder and originally from Romania. So I love all sorts of different hobbies and have been attacking a bucket list since I was 15. And I've just really loved building the journey of WeConnect the last 11 and a half years while also pursuing some of my creative endeavors with music.
Fantastic. Thank you for that introduction. And we really do. We have so much to cover. Before we got into it, I wanted to hear what were some exciting hobbies that you're into right now?
I love backpacking. My partner, he got me into it a couple years ago, and just general traveling, but also just experiencing one-off bucket list items. I've done skydiving and I've explored the Amazon in Peru. So all sorts of things that allow me to experience life at its fullest. And the world has so much to offer. I always say we only have about 90 years on this planet if we're lucky with longevity health. I know some people think longer than that, but but I want to make sure that I'm able to take advantage of everything the world has to offer and have different experiences to learn and be a lifelong learner. I also love reading books. That's one of my most favorite pastimes, and spending time with our dog.
What's your dog's name? Just out of curiosity.
Her name's Lulu. She's a French bulldog, and she is the spunkiest, sweetest pup.
Oh my gosh, I absolutely love dogs. We have 2 dogs. I could go on and on about that, Daniela. But I really do. I want to jump in right away with WeConnect Health. You mentioned that at the time you had fled communist Romania, and then here you begin what is a absolutely successful venture-backed company. So what was it like as you were growing up during those early chapters, that as you reflect back, you pulled some of those lessons maybe learned during that time into starting a very successful company?
Absolutely. Yeah. So to back it up a little bit, I was born in Romania, as you mentioned. And when the revolution happened, we were refugees in Germany, Portugal, and then moved to the United States. My dad was able to get the lottery visa. Between that time, between age 5 to about 11, we moved about technically like 17 times within those countries. So it was a lot of change. And what I would say that in those early years created lessons really from my parents, resilience is hard work. Hard work really pays off, and being proud of working hard and putting in the time, and trying too hard is actually a quality. As well as having the emotional resilience to go through hard things. That's just part of life and part of someone's journey. So I would say that's second. And then from my mom, I really learned how to be super organized, while from my dad, how to be very efficient with time. Those were all lessons that came from that. And then the last one, but probably most important, is I did experience some adverse events during that time, including being bullied and things like that, and just struggling with being an only child going through all these changes. So understanding now that that's a superpower, that change is a constant, and also that everybody, no matter your background, where you come from, everybody's human, and everybody deserves kindness and grace and care, because I got treated differently in each culture and country, but I'm the same person. So really, that that really taught me to love everybody, no matter what their background is, no matter what adverse events they may have had or circumstances. Everybody's human, and everybody deserves kindness and care.
I absolutely love that. And, you also had mentioned that, as you reflect back when you started this company, you explain and you speak about your own recovery journey. And so I'm curious that when was that like moment where you thought, wow, like I could go ahead, I can make a company out of this. I can now serve others through my own lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So while that childhood experience gave me so much now, strength and superpowers, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. As a kid, having those experiences, it was also at the same time came with hardship and trauma that I didn't have the tools of how to address those things. Because coming from our culture, we don't really talk about therapy at the dinner table. And so when I was 28 years old in 2014, I hit my deepest bottom and my hardest point in life, which ended up turning into the best thing ever. It led to the inception of WeConnect. So, what happened is that I put myself in treatment in a 28-day inpatient program once I realized that I couldn't live with substances, but I couldn't live without them either. And this was about an 11-year journey of struggling with substances, but also I was a workaholic, and the two propped each other up for a long time until the last 2 years of that journey. It just was not sustainable anymore in any way. And I remember I got to that point where, again, I realized I don't know how to live with these habits, but I also don't know how to live without them. And it was really the only thing in my life where I wasn't able to push through and just succeed. Lo and behold, I didn't know that it's an actual healthcare condition, and I didn't have the tools. And so when I entered the inpatient program, I felt deeply connected to everybody that was there with me. And I realized, though, that at the end of the 28 days, we're all going back to our old environments. And that would be a huge risk to anybody in recovery, or attempting recovery. And so that was the first moment about halfway through treatment where I had the idea, with my professional background in technology, that I could build something on our phones that are in our pockets 24/7 that could read that human connection. So that was the first realization. The second was, at the end of the 28-day program, all we were given was a piece of paper that said, do all these things for the rest of your life. And it listed a number of care plan activities. And I thought, well, there's no accountability here. A piece of paper is not going to do it. So, how could I build something with human connection and accountability? And then the third key component happened the day I got discharged from inpatient. I went through a Starbucks drive through, and I didn't realize the one card I had on me had been shut off. And I tried to return the coffee to the barista, saying, I'm so sorry, I just got out of treatment. Take the coffee drink back. I didn't realize my card wasn't working. And instead of taking back the coffee, not only did he give me that, but he also gifted me a cake pop, which was only $1.50 at the time. This is in 2014. But that act of reward washed away all of my anxiety about all the things I had to do that day for my recovery, including a 3-hour outpatient, going to a 12-step meeting, and checking into my recovery housing. And I didn't know until many months later that what I experienced is the science of contingency management, which in behavioral health is really the research behind the most effective way to treat substance use disorder and mental health, is by providing people with rewards for forming new habits. And so essentially, WeConnect has those three components today: the human connection component, the accountability, and the incentive and the reward to continue on that.
No, thank you for sharing that. And there were so many like different pieces that I really want to like pick apart. But when you look back, you kept mentioning how important the connection piece was of being in person, being able to speak to others as you were coming out of that recovery. And as that was happening and you reflect back, even today, if you kind of combine it with technology and the human connection and how that's becoming extremely valuable in our lives, could you maybe just elaborate on the importance of human connection in your experience?
Absolutely. So I always say that recovery from mental health or substance use disorder, any of these things, it's sort of parallel to diabetes. For diabetes, you need your insulin on a daily basis. And for recovery, you need human connection. And now with technology, and especially since the pandemic, that's sort of become the norm where people do find connection. In fact, one of our oldest customers, one of our oldest members in our recovery community on WeConnect, was in his 90s during the pandemic. And he joined the support group meetings thinking, I don't think this is going to work. How am I going to feel connected to somebody online? But they actually stuck around because they did find that human connection at a very deep level in through the digital space. And it really does work. And we've seen the outcomes and the data and the results from our work, and also the anecdotal feedback about how this is saving their lives and how deeply they feel connected and understood and seen by our peer support specialists that serve our members through WeConnect.
I love that. And I do. I feel like human connection is becoming something that really is. It's becoming more and more valuable as technology does come into different industries, different like disciplines, even. And my next question, you had mentioned it a little bit when you said you were growing up, the idea of hard work, but then resilience. And when it comes to like resilience based leadership, as you were creating this company, you kind of speak about resilience based leadership. And how have you been able to apply that in practice? Like, what does that actually look like when building this company and obviously for it to become very successful?
Yeah, to me, resilience-based leadership means that sort of from Stoicism is that the obstacle is the way. When you find an obstacle, overcoming it or finding ways around it, that's the path to success. And seeing failure as learnings and opportunities. So that's definitely a big component of that. It's also that, I always talk about, I call it the bathtub moments. Sometimes there's been really tough days where you just want to curl up and cry in the bathtub. But all you have to do is allow those emotions to come about. And then the next morning, just get back up, attend the meetings, put one foot in front of the other and take that action. And I really do believe that the universe responds when you do that. And ultimately, everything is temporary and things will get better. There's going to be challenges after they get better, and things will get better again. It's just about continuing to keep going no matter what and no matter your energy level. So if you can only give 10% one day, that is your 100% for that day. And that's okay. You still put one foot in front of the other. And keeping in mind that everybody's human. So also being kind and compassionate towards your team members, your employees. They have their own challenges that they're going through, but as long as you know that they're committed and that they're learning, then that's the most important thing. And that's the way to lead a really successful team.
I love that. And I really do. You mentioned kindness. And then in addition, even the idea of compassion in general. And so when you're able to balance like the high performance expectations with compassion, like, could you maybe just explore that a little bit more? If some people are listening, they have a small business, but how you were able to manage like the results component, but then also that compassionate piece, which is very important today.
Yeah, it's all about actually asking questions and making sure there's understanding. Whenever I make a decision, it's really important to explain the why. And then the other big learning lesson I had is that you know your vision inside your head really well. So you need to communicate it several times before it actually lands. And that it does not mean that your team members are incompetent. It's that you actually know it so well inside and you need to share that understanding. And that requires repetition. And that's okay. And then The other component of that is to ask your team members if there's any blockers. So you've set the expectation, you explain the why, welcome them to actually disagree with you, and then having the kind of culture that while you talk through the disagreements and you may land on their opinion or my opinion, but once there's a decision, you're a team. And so once you get up from the table and you've discussed everything and you've laid everything on the table, once there's a decision, understanding that there's still a commitment to go in the direction that's been decided. So once all of that has been laid out, then you hold them accountable. And accountability looks like, look, we gave you every opportunity, right? If you're blocked by anything, it's my job as a leader to unblock. So once I've unblocked, the expectation is there. There's an understanding of why we're doing this, and there's been a decision made. You hold people accountable. And if there's still failure on their end, if it has to do with their own performance, there's an opportunity to coach and help them learn. And after there's been a couple chances given, if the results are still not there, then it's time to make a change. But all of the work that I just mentioned needs to happen before that. And that's a responsibility that rests on the leader. And a lot of times what we find is that the leader has not met one of those components 90% of the time. It's very, very rare that actually people do genuinely fail because they don't want to do it or they genuinely are going against you if you've met all of those requirements before. So that's why we've been able to have an incredible team at WeConnect. People have been here for 8 years out of the 11. Many people have. And that is because there's such a passion and commitment to the mission. And for those of you that know startups, 8 years is like a lifetime. So our turnover is very low. And our team is super incredible. And we've seen people come in as individual contributors and become directors at the company. And it's been beautiful to see their growth. And genuinely, we have really smart people at WeConnect. And that's something I'm super grateful for. We wouldn't be here at all without the team. You know, I just play a small role of giving people the resources they need to succeed as best as I can.
I just love that. And a big congratulations to you because that really is, I mean, for 11 years, like you said, for employees to be there 8+ years, that really is an accomplishment, especially today, because if I recall correctly, I think it's on average like maybe 2 to 4 years that people will stay with a company. And so that's really like kudos to you for creating that culture. And that's exactly where I kind of wanted to head next was you've mapped out the compassion, how important kindness is, and then also just now how important communication is, being able to speak up, to share your opinion, even if it's kind of goes against sometimes others or the leader themselves. But I think that's so important today is to be welcoming to that constructive feedback, but then also having that challenge sometimes. And it kind of, I think, recenters everything that, you know, sometimes we do. Like we think, like you were speaking about, like the mission and the vision, how you have to repeat that. I mean, for me, I have to reread stuff sometimes, like over and over. And that's always been my nature, but I know that. And so that's the way that as I do, is I learn something new. I know that in advance. But I say all of this because with the communication piece, as you are communicating, like when you were first starting, like what did you want the culture to feel like within the organization? How did you go about building such a strong culture?
Yeah, I want people to genuinely enjoy coming to work and to also feel safe. And we have to walk the talk. We're a mental health company. So, people are very comfortable in saying, hey, I need to take a mental health day. And people are open when they're going through personal challenges, when they need to take time off or recharge or maybe take a leave because they've had, some huge life event happen, and knowing that they're safe to come back to work as long as they are genuine and honest about it and there's a plan created to not leave everybody hanging. And that's always been the culture that we built here at WeConnect, that trust. And I just got this feedback again last week. We were hiring for a new position and several candidates, by the time they got to me for a final interview, they said, wow, every single person I've spoken to here loves being here and they feel like they've never been in a work environment like this. There's no fear. There's only safety, and people genuinely love being here. We have quite a few employees who worked in public service or activism before, and some of them were actually uncertain if they were going to stay at a for-profit company, right? We're benefit corp, but still a C corp. We still have shareholders and investors. And they found that the culture here has been so welcoming. And again, everybody at WeConnect is genuinely kind and passionate about what they're doing, that they've stayed. And that wasn't something in their initial plan, they told me later, which to me is one of the most rewarding things to hear, that people genuinely want to be here. And that means a lot to me.
Absolutely. And I do. I think that's, like I said, it's kudos to the culture that you're building there. But also, I really do like, I just want to go back to that and emphasize that how important it is when it comes to that communication and forming that type of connection where people do, they feel that it is okay to speak up. And I like how you spoke about like the honest piece, that if in fact they do maybe need to take a day due to personal reasons, as long as they have that sense of honesty and the communication piece, going back to the team, like you said, like not kind of leaving your team hanging, that it's respectable, that you'll be back, the following day. So I absolutely love that. Something I think so important to talk about, like on this particular podcast, is that yes, it's wonderful when things are so positive and we're going along, or you see all the success, like on paper, so to speak. But during that journey, of course, there's so many different challenges, especially with starting a company. So I'm just curious if, when you reflect back, what was maybe a challenge that stood out, but how you were able to overcome that challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it goes back to putting one foot in front of the other. 5, 6 years ago, a contract that we had that was supposed to be company making at the time ended up going away. The company restructured, the partner, they also didn't keep some of the commitments that they shared. And I made the mistake of hiring ahead before that revenue really started materializing. And it was a huge blow. It was the majority of one of the investment rounds that we had. And it was psychologically really tough on me. In fact, I felt pretty beaten down for a while. And the board supported us in bringing in a former founder and CFO to support. And so, one, it's being humble enough to know that when you need help, you need support and help. And then also, going back to, also this is also for the culture, but also going through a challenge that's important as a leader, is leading by example. So I, as best as I can, I always admit when I make a mistake, because then it makes employees feel comfortable when they're coming up with challenges or if they've made a mistake, to express that, and then we can solve. If people are hiding what happened, or aren't comfortable enough to admit a mistake, then it sets the stage for not only a fear-based culture, but then people, like you said, aren't going to be able to speak up or disagree with you. So I welcome disagreements. I welcome new opinions, because sometimes that actually leads to way better ideas. But also, when a leader is able to admit their mistakes and be humble about it, or accept help when it's needed, then it just makes things better and we're able to succeed. One of the things is that, again, being a continuous learner. Like, I know that I don't know everything, and that's why we have experts on the team. And oftentimes when we problem solve, I also make sure to give credit and mention, okay, this problem is not within my expertise, it's within yours. So actually, you're leading in this moment. So that gives people the comfort to make it through those really tough challenges.
That's so true. And what's so interesting is I still remember it like it was yesterday, but when I was in my pursuing my undergraduate degree, I remember my perspective of a professor, Daniela. It was like, they are perfect. They are so up high. I can't even speak to them. and, and to your point, I'm just happy that you really do. You emphasize that human element, that we're all here learning along the way, that even when you hit those like terminal degrees, there's always more to learn, especially in this world that we're living in today, because it's ever so changing. And I know you were mentioning that at the very beginning of how many times that you changed locations with your family, but how that, if you look back, helped you navigate running this business now in a different context, of course, but the mindset. But, Daniela, I have to pivot for a second because I think this is fascinating that you are also a musician. So I'm going to open up the floor to you. How did this come about? Was this initially a hobby? Tell us what that looked like.
Yeah, so I loved electronic music my whole life. I started going to raves when I was like 15, and I just loved, yeah, I loved electronic music, but I never thought of myself as an artist, which is also humorous because I always tell other people that every human is creative, but I didn't have that confidence in myself early on. So when I actually took my first tech job during nights and weekends, I actually had a nightclub promotions company in Seattle where we booked DJs and promoted nightclubs. And so I was still able to be involved in something that I was incredibly passionate about. That was a very short stint that took a pause, but I continued throughout my 20s and 30s to go to nightclubs, festivals. It was a huge part of my life, and obviously is today in a different way. When 2018 hit, I was experiencing a lot of stress from that challenge that I was telling you about a little bit earlier when that big contract went away. And I needed some way to process all of that stress and disappointment and, again, put one foot in front of the other and continue the mission of WeConnect. So a friend of mine that I actually supported in getting into recovery himself, he's been a long time successful producer and DJ. And I just asked him for lessons. I said, can you give me some lessons in private for DJing? And we went along for a couple months and he said, wow, you're learning this stuff really fast. And I said, I really love it, but I have a vision in my head how tracks and how sounds and how songs should be. And he said, well, do you want to learn how to produce music? And I said, sure, let's do some lessons. And then the pandemic hit. And he had just moved to Tulum, Mexico, the month before the pandemic hit. So he knew the lay of the land. He met all the locals. So a huge group of friends where we are all connected through Burning Man. We're a Burning Man camp. We all moved to Tulum for the pandemic. And that's where I was able to even more deeply sit next to him and learn, and started really practicing my production skills and my DJing skills. And on a whim, I was looking through Instagram and I heard a couple of tracks from a record label who is led by a very prominent, extremely successful, famous DJ producer named Lane Nate. And I said, you know what? I had just created this track and I felt like it fit the vibe and the ethos of this record label, submitted it, and within a couple days got a response. And he ended up putting my track on one of his mixes that he put out on SoundCloud, signed the track, and then asked me if I would go on one of the tour dates with him. And that was in 2021, was my first big show at the Brooklyn Mirage, which is now no longer in New York. And that started my touring career in 2021. And since then, I've put out, EP, several other tracks. I had the opportunity to work with Sia and her team. I put out a remix for one of her tracks of her latest album just over a year ago. And it's been an incredible journey. It wasn't the initial intention to turn professional, but the universe sort of led me that way. And it's been an incredible, humbling, exciting, and beautiful experience.
This is absolutely incredible. I don't even know where to start with this. I think this is so neat that you are able to juggle becoming obviously the CEO of WeConnect Health, but then alongside now your music career. But Daniela, how do you do it all?
Subscribe to the work-life harmony term, and there's, for a good portion of that touring career, the last few years, they actually really perfectly balanced each other, because the music, being able nights and weekends to perform, has given me the relief and the mental health support and the ability to express myself creatively and connect with people in a different way. Now, my last show was in November. I got to close out for Paul Van Dyke, who I used to go see when I was, in my teens. So huge legend, huge respect for him. And that was a really beautiful set. Since November, I haven't taken on any gigs because with WeConnect, we have been scaling at an astronomical rate. And my partner and I actually got a home and a puppy. And so consciously, I've taken a step back. The other component that happened is towards not the Paul Van Dyke show, but a few shows preceding that, I was feeling myself a little bit going through the motion and also feeling the pressures that as an artist today, you have to really put out yourself on social media, which is something that's really tough for me. It's not part of the artistry or the creation or the performance process. So obviously super excited to do that Paul Van Dyke show. I felt like I was able to express myself and have the type of set that I creatively can do. But I reflected on the year prior and I felt that more than once I was going through the motions or thinking too much about what the audience wants versus myself gifting them my expression of myself. And so, for all of those reasons, I've taken a bit of a slowdown to really come back to source and what music means to me and making sure I'm coming from the right place. So, I'm excited to say that this month I'm setting up my new music studio in our home and I'm going to go back in the cave and start creating some more tracks and excited to, when the time is right, to release those and start going back on the road for the gigs that feel right. And this is a conversation that's going on in our electronic community, music community now. Even artists that are much bigger than myself have actually posted about the same sentiment, that the way that AI and social media pressure is happening in our space is really tough right now on artists. And a lot of artists have started going through the motions and they're figuring out how to go back to their real expression, their creativity, regardless of these pressures. And how do they move from here? And how do they move from here from a financial standpoint too? It's gotten really tough in the music industry to really make it and to get the value that you're putting out as an artist to be appropriately compensated for it. So that's something that's been happening for me in the last year and a half. But going back to your question about work-life harmony, it's really about consciously making a decision and not just passively falling into things. Like I consciously made the decision about where the harmony needed to create space for other things more than music versus when music was taking a precedent over other things in my personal life. So
I absolutely love that. And I love how, you speak about this idea of like self-awareness too, of when it was becoming even stressful with social media, we could find ourselves like being lost in that process, that what we truly desire or love to do and the way that we like to do it, whether that is through music or just presenting ourselves, how you kind of have to be very self-aware that it's not becoming a sense of performance, but that it really is, it's your true self, because people can connect to that. And then I'm curious, alongside WeConnect Health, how do you believe the creativity in music has been able to, do you think has it slipped into WeConnect Health in some creative way? Has it helped? Has it maybe like stayed separate? I'm just curious on your thoughts about that.
absolutely. I mean, they feed into each other. So the flow and mental state or the mindset that you have to have through the production process of a track and the attention to detail and the resilience you have to get to, and also knowing when something is finished, that it doesn't require additional tinkering. Those are reminders for the startup journey, the company building journey as well. So that's number one. But also bringing levity and fun and the connection piece to it, that definitely feeds over into the company building side. And then overall, building a music career and building a company have a ton of parallels, except when you're building a music career, you are the product versus like having an external product that you're building with our platform and application and our peer support specialists and how they work together as a team. So both are actually very creative endeavors. It's just a little bit of a difference in terms of like where the product is. And then the third thing that I'll say is when you're performing and you have an excellent set, there's that adrenaline rush, you feel so good, and there's so much joy. But when I have a set that I'm not super happy about or I made some mistakes, it's been a very humble reminder to be mindful of that self criticism and that disappointment that you feel, or that I feel, and remember that we have to approach that with curiosity, with how can I get better, how can I work harder, what needs more attention, and bringing that and applying those same concepts when you're building a company.
Danielle, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's so important, the mindset that you were just speaking about, and having that sense of perspective that when we are learning something new, or like you said, if we've been doing something, but something was maybe off, or we didn't feel like it was our best performance in some capacity, that we're able to go back to the drawing board, but to become curious and to become, it's kind of, I don't know, kind of like an internal reflection that you do. You remain kind to yourself, but you know that we're all here to grow and to learn and to become better at, if it's a art, if it's a craft that we're doing. But I love that. It's like the mindset and the like perspective. I love how you really like focused in on that, just a mindset shift almost.
Yeah,
But
and I'm sure you know this very well with athletics and sports. There's so many parallels in that to both of these things. Yeah.
absolutely. You're right. I mean, really, when you speak about like the idea of sport and the ability to come back quick, it's the same thing. It was just exactly when you were speaking about that. I was actually going through my mind. I'm like, man, there's so many times when I was like, Corey, you could have done so much better. But like, you go back to practicing, obviously, in the gym the next day and you get better and better. But Danielle, I really do. I want to ask you one question before we close out with a positive message. But you have been so incredibly successful with WeConnect Health and your music career, as you just mentioned. But what could possibly be next for you, Daniela?
I mean, right now, my 100% attention is uh, scaling WeConnect to a massive, massive audience and impact. In November, we closed our biggest contract to date. It's a national contract with a health plan, 27 states, and the numbers are doubling every month. And the engagement is 87% of those that have onboarded going into month 5 now. And that's pretty incredible. And so taking that and applying it to more types of populations and continuing to put out the outcomes and the impact that we have in terms of reducing emergency room stays, inpatient stays, and improving people's quality of life and their length of recovery. That is what I, eat and sleep and think about. And I'm so, so excited. And so, yeah, the sky's the limit for us. We, after a lot of years of building this company, we finally have hit scale, and now we're able to scale that. And we are going to be integrating some really new technology components that support that human connection. So being human first always, AI powered, so that AI can be used to actually create workflows and components that allow our peer support specialists to have more meaningful human connection. So that's sort of the frontier for us. And there's all sorts of technology components, not just AI, but I see the future with a lot of different possibilities when it comes to even hardware, analytics, predictability. And so that is what I'm super excited about, and just continuing to build a beautiful life and leading by example and doing bucket list items and spending time with my partner and dog. That's the horizon for the next 3 to 5 years. So.
I love that, Daniela. And I do. I want to give you some time, though, to reflect upon, as you had mentioned, the positive impact that you are having right now to be able to scale and to reach so many more individuals. Like I said, you were positively impacting with WeConnect Health. But what does it mean to you as you look at your journey and now you see how many people you are impacting in such a positive way? What does that mean to you?
I mean, yeah, taking an idea that was in my head to see it become reality and validating the assumptions that I had. is not just intrinsically meaningful, but I want to show the world and empower people to know that they can do the same and that you can do well and do good. The two do not need to be at odds. There's a lot of things in our system that make us think that those two things are at odds. And a lot of times systems are designed to do just that, for reasons that are not well intentioned. But demonstrating that that doesn't have to be the case, I think we can hope for a better world. And I humbly just hope that WeConnect can be an example of that, so that other people that, come from humble beginnings know that if they put their mind to it and they try and they go after their dreams, that there is possibility. Now, I say that with a lot of humility because I do think that the system often works against people. And one of the things, even with mental health, that gets ignored is that actually poverty is one of the biggest impacts on somebody's mental health. And that gets ignored or it gets stigmatized. And that's something that we need to tear down in our society. And we need to rebuild a better system and a well-intentioned system. So I know I went a little bit off topic, but it's something that I'm really passionate about. So what it means to me is, going back to your original question, is setting an example that it is possible. It might be hard. There might be a lot of ups and downs. There might be a lot of hardship and mistakes that are made along the way, but it is possible.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I got a little bit emotional when you were speaking because I really do. I think it's so beautiful that when an individual does have this idea that's in their head initially, but to be brought out into reality and to watch it impact others, I think is so beautiful. So Daniela, like a big congratulations to you and all the success that you have had with WeConnect Health. And my last question, if you could provide a positive message or a positive quote for our listeners in the community.
Yeah, I would say go out there and be the reason that somebody thinks that there's good in people. Just go out there and be kind, especially if you've had an adverse experience. Then you can, the biggest way to get revenge on that is to be good and to be kind and to prove that that does not have to be the way. So that's what I would say.
Daniela, thank you so much for that kind message, positive message. And I really do. I just want to genuinely thank you as far as coming on the podcast, just sharing your journey, your story, and, speaking about WeConnect Health. But then also, I think it's just so exciting. You're a musician alongside of it. And that's just so incredible to kind of explore that journey today. So thank you so much for coming on, Daniela.
Thank you so much, Courtney.